The Texas sun had no mercy in late August, and neither did the road. Caleb Mercer's boots were held together more by willpower than leather. Each step kicked up red dust that settled in the creases of his face, in the folds of his ragged Confederate jacket, in the open sores on his feet. He'd been walking for 6 weeks. Before that, another month recovering in a field hospital that wasn't really a hospital, just a barn with blood-soaked hay and a surgeon who'd run out of morphine 2 years into the war. The war was over, had been for months. Lee surrendered at Appomattox and the South collapsed like a tent with broken poles. Caleb had been in a prison camp in Maryland when it happened, and it took another 3 months before they let the prisoners go. Not out of kindness, but because feeding them cost money nobody wanted to spend. So he walked. Through Maryland, Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas. No money for a horse, no friends with wagons heading west. Just feet and determination and a destination that pulled at him like a rope around his chest. Home. The word had kept him breathing when dysentery tried to kill him in that prison. It kept him moving when his blistered feet screamed for him to stop. Home meant his wife, Sarah. Home meant his boy, Thomas, who'd be 7 now, old enough to remember his father, old enough to run into his arms when he came up the road. Home meant the 160 acres he'd claimed 5 years ago, the cabin he'd built log by log, the fence line he'd sweated over in the brutal Texas heat. It meant something worth surviving for. The landscape grew familiar as he walked. That twisted oak where lightning had split the trunk, the creek bed that ran dry in summer but flooded violent in spring, the ridgeline that meant his land was just beyond, tucked into the valley where the grass grew thick and water ran clean most of the year. His heart, which had barely beaten in months, started hammering. Almost there. He crested the ridge at dusk, and the valley spread below him in shadows. His cabin sat where he'd left it, but something was wrong. The fence he'd built, 30 yards of split rail running along the eastern property line, was broken in places, sagging in others. The vegetable garden Sarah had tended was overgrown with weeds taller than a man. The barn door hung crooked on one hinge. Caleb's throat tightened. Maybe Sarah had struggled without him. Maybe the drought he'd heard about had hit this area hard. Maybe she'd simply had too much to handle alone with a young boy and no help. He'd fix it. Whatever was broken, he'd fix it. He started down the slope, his pace quickening despite the pain in his feet. The cabin door was closed. Smoke rose from the chimney. Thin, lazy smoke that meant someone was home. His pulse thundered in his ears. 3 years. 3 years since he'd held his wife, kissed his son, slept in his own bed. He reached the porch and stopped. The rocking chair on the porch wasn't Sarah's. It was newer, rougher, made from different wood. A pair of boots sat by the door. Too small to be his, too large to be Sarah's. Men's boots, but not his. Confusion clouded his mind. Had Sarah remarried? Had she given him up for dead? No, she wouldn't. She'd wait. She'd promised. He raised his fist and knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow, cautious. The scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The door opened 6 inches and a rifle barrel emerged first, followed by a woman's face. Not Sarah. This woman was younger than Sarah, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back severe and eyes the color of winter storms. Her face was lean, sun-weathered, and carried the kind of hardness that came from making difficult choices and living with them. What do you want? Her voice was flat, guarded. Caleb blinked. This is my home. No, she said. It's mine. There's been a mistake. He kept his hands visible, non-threatening. I'm Caleb Mercer. This land is registered to me. I built this cabin. You're dead, she interrupted. Says so on the county register. Property was abandoned. I claimed it legal 6 months ago. The words hit him like a fist to the gut. Dead. Abandoned. I'm standing right here, he said, his voice rough. I'm not dead. You are to the law. She didn't lower the rifle. And you're trespassing. His mind raced. County register. 6 months ago. That meant Sarah had left more than 6 months ago, maybe a year. She'd left him for dead, taken Thomas and gone. Where? Where's my wife? The question came out strangled. Where's my son? Something flickered in the woman's eyes, not quite sympathy, but recognition of pain. Don't know about your wife. When I got here, place was empty. Heard from folks in town she headed west. California, maybe. That's all I know. California. The word echoed in his skull. California was 2,000 miles away. It might as well be the moon. You're lying. But even as he said it, he knew she wasn't. The truth was written in the overgrown garden, the broken fence, the silence where his family should be. Believe what you want, she said, but you need to leave. Now. This is my land. His voice hardened. 3 years of war, prison, starvation, and walking, all to come home to this? I built every inch of this place. I'm not leaving. Her jaw tightened. You take one step inside this cabin, and I will shoot you. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. They stared at each other across the threshold. The rifle didn't waver in her hands. Caleb's mind churned through options, none of them good. He could fight her. He was bigger, stronger, trained by war. But she had the gun and the law on her side. He could go to the county seat, challenge the claim, but that was 40 miles away and would take weeks to resolve. He had no money, no proof, nothing but the word of a dead man. Exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. His legs trembled. Black spots danced in his vision. The woman saw it. Her expression didn't soften, but something shifted. There's a lean-to behind the barn. Roof don't leak much. You can sleep there tonight. Come morning, you leave. I'm not leaving my land. Then we got a problem. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the porch railing, breathing hard. When was the last time he'd eaten? Yesterday? 2 days ago? You sick? She sounded more annoyed than concerned. Tired. You need a doctor? I need my home. But the words came out weak, defeated. She studied him for a long moment, then lowered the rifle slightly. Lean to. One night. You try anything, you won't wake up to see morning. It wasn't mercy. It was practicality. A dead man on her porch would bring questions she probably didn't want to answer. Caleb pushed off the railing and stumbled toward the barn. His barn. The one he'd built. Now occupied by a stranger's 2 horses and a milk cow he didn't recognize. The lean-to was barely standing, 3 walls and a roof that sagged dangerously. But it was out of the wind, and there was old hay to lie on. He collapsed onto it and stared at the darkening sky. California. Sarah had given up on him, had taken Thomas and started a new life somewhere he couldn't follow, had probably told the boy his father was dead, probably remarried by now to someone who could provide, who could be there, who wasn't rotting in a Maryland prison camp. The injustice of it burned in his chest. He'd survived hell for them. Every brutal day, every moment he wanted to give up and die, he'd thought of them. And they'd left. No, Sarah had left. She'd made a choice. And this woman, this stranger, had taken everything else. He must have slept because he woke to someone kicking his boot. Dawn was breaking, gray and cold. The woman stood over him, no rifle this time, but a knife on her belt and a hardness in her posture that said she knew how to use it. You still here? It wasn't a question. Caleb sat up slowly, every muscle screaming. I told you I'm not leaving. And I told you this land is mine. Take me to the county seat. We'll settle this legal. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think the law cares about a dead Confederate soldier? You think they're going to overturn a valid claim because a ghost showed up? I'm not a ghost. Might as well be. She crossed her arms. Look, I don't know what you went through in the war, and I don't care. I got my own troubles. But this land is filed legal in my name. I paid the claim fee. I've worked it for 6 months. It's mine. You've worked it? He stood, anger overriding exhaustion. The fence is falling down. The garden's dead. The barn door's broken. You call that working it? Her eyes flashed. I'm one woman alone. You want to criticize how I maintain a homestead by myself? You can go straight to hell. Then let me help. The word surprised them both. She stared at him. What? You need help. I need a place to stay while I figure out what to do. The idea formed even as he spoke it. I'll fix the fence, repair the barn, work the land. In exchange, you don't shoot me. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You got a better idea? She did not, and they both knew it. Why? She asked finally. Why stay here if your family's gone? Because I have nowhere else to go, he thought. Because if I leave this place, I'll have nothing left to prove I ever existed. Because it's my land, he said instead. She shook her head slowly. You're going to get yourself killed. You know that? Either by me or by the men who come around. What men? The kind who see a woman alone and think she's easy pickings. Her voice went flat. I've sent 3 of them packing. Next one might not leave. So that's why she kept the rifle close. Why she'd been so quick to aim it at him. Then you definitely need help, he said. She studied him, really looked at him, for the first time. Took in the ragged clothes, the gaunt face, the way he held himself like a man who'd been broken and poorly reassembled. You eat yet? She asked. Not in a while. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Come on then, can't have you dying on my property. Makes it harder to claim I shot you in self-defense. The cabin interior was achingly familiar and completely foreign. Same layout, same fireplace, same window placement. But none of Sarah's things remained. The furniture was different, rougher, more practical. No curtains on the windows, no rug on the floor. It felt like walking through a memory that had been painted over. The woman, he still didn't know her name, gestured to the table. Sit. He sat. She ladled something from a pot over the fire into a bowl and shoved it across the table. Stew, thin but hot. His hands shook as he ate, too hungry for pride. She watched him in silence, then poured coffee from a battered pot. Lydia Cross. He looked up. That's my name, she said, since we're apparently doing this. Caleb Mercer. I know, you said. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. You really walk all the way from wherever the war dumped you? Maryland. Jesus. She said it like a curse, not a prayer. That's stupid. You're stupid for doing that. He almost smiled. Almost. Probably. Definitely. She took a sip of coffee. So here's how this works. You sleep in the lean-to. You don't come in this cabin unless I say. You work, fence first, then the barn, then whatever else needs doing. I'll feed you, but that's it. No pay. I don't need pay. I know what you need, and you're not getting it. Her voice turned hard. This land is mine, Caleb Mercer. I don't care what piece of paper you had before the war. That paper don't exist anymore. You're dead, remember? Then bring me back to life. He met her eyes. Take me to the county seat. File whatever paperwork needs filing. Put my name back on the register. Why would I do that? Because it's right. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Right don't mean much out here. Right don't keep you fed. Right don't stop men with guns from taking what they want. Then what does? Being meaner and more stubborn than they are. She set down her cup. 1 month. You work the land for 1 month, prove you're not going to cut my throat in my sleep, and I'll think about taking you to the county seat. 1 month. 30 days to prove he deserved his own land back. The absurdity should have made him angry. Instead, he just felt tired. Deal, he said. She stood abruptly. Fence posts are stacked behind the barn. Tools are in the shed, what's left of them. You break something, you fix it yourself. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel old. She moved to the door, then paused. And Caleb? I meant what I said. You try anything, I will kill you. I've killed before and I didn't lose sleep over it. She said it matter of fact, the way someone might mention they'd killed a chicken for dinner. Understood, he said. She left him alone with his stew and his thoughts. The fence was worse up close. Entire sections had rotted through. Posts leaned at drunken angles. Whatever rails remained were split and useless. It would take weeks to fix properly, maybe months. Caleb started with his corner post, digging out the rotted base and setting a new one. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Dig, set, pack, brace. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget, that he'd built this fence, walked this land, planned a future here. The sun climbed, sweat soaked through his shirt, his shoulders screamed from disuse, his back threatened to give out, but he kept working. Because if he stopped, he'd have to think about Sarah, about Thomas, about how completely his life had been erased. Better to dig. Around midday, Lydia appeared with a jar of water and a piece of hardtack. She didn't speak, just set them on a stump and left. He drank the water, gnawed the hardtack, and went back to work. By evening, he'd replaced 3 posts and started on the rails. Not much, but progress. His hands were bleeding, his back was fire. But the work felt good. Felt real. He washed at the water pump as the sun set, then returned to the lean-to. Lydia had left a blanket folded on the hay, rough wool that smelled like horse, but clean. Another small mercy she probably wouldn't admit to. He wrapped himself in it and stared at the barn rafters. 1 month. Then what? Even if she agreed to help him reclaim the land legally, what would he do with it? Farm it alone? The place needed 2 people minimum to run properly, and that was before you factored in drought, disease, raiders, and all the other ways Texas tried to kill you. Sarah had understood that. She'd been a partner, not just a wife. Strong, capable, willing to work until her hands bled. That's why he'd married her, why he'd thought they could make it out here. But she'd also been practical. When he didn't come home, when the letters stopped, when the war ended and he still didn't appear, she'd made the logical choice. Cut her losses, take their son, go somewhere with more opportunity and less heartbreak. He couldn't blame her. He wanted to, but he couldn't. The anger that had sustained him through the walk home was evaporating, leaving only exhaustion and a grief so deep it had no bottom. He slept. The days fell into a pattern. Wake before dawn, work until his body threatened to quit, eat whatever Lydia provided, work until dark, collapse. Repeat. The fence took shape, then the barn door got rehung, then the porch steps that had rotted through, small repairs that added up to something larger, not restoration exactly, but prevention, stopping the decay before it consumed everything. Lydia worked too, he noticed. She wasn't lazy, just overwhelmed. She tended the garden, such as it was, hauled water, managed the livestock, cooked, cleaned, and kept a rifle within reach at all times. A one-person operation stretched too thin. They didn't talk much. She'd bring him water or food, check on his progress, sometimes offer a curt comment about what needed doing next. He'd nod, keep working. It was almost comfortable in its simplicity. 2 weeks in, the first test came. Caleb was replacing a section of corral fencing when he heard horses. 3 of them, approaching from the east. He straightened, hammer in hand, and watched them come. They were rough men. That was clear before they even reached the cabin. The kind who'd survived the war by being meaner than their enemies, and had found the peace harder to navigate than the fighting. The leader was a bull of a man, bearded and thick through the shoulders. His companions were leaner, hungrier, like wolves flanking a bear. They saw Caleb and reined up. "Well now," the leader said. "Didn't know Lydia got herself a man." "Didn't," Caleb replied evenly. "I work here." "Work here," the man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "That what we're calling it now?" One of the wolves snickered. Caleb set down his hammer slowly. "Something I can help you with?" "Oh, we're not here for you." The leader swung down from his horse. "We're here to talk business with Lydia. She around?" The cabin door opened. Lydia stepped out, rifle in hand. "Told you last time, Pike," she called. "I'm not interested in selling." Pike. The name fit. All blunt force and sharp edges. "Now, Lydia, that's no way to greet visitors." Pike ambled toward the porch, his companions spreading out. "We're just trying to help. Woman alone out here. It ain't safe." "I'm managing fine." "Are you, though?" Pike gestured around. "Place is falling apart. You got one scrawny hired hand and a lot of land you can't work proper. My offer's generous." "Your offer's robbery, and you know it." Pike's smile vanished. "Careful, woman. Generosity has limits." Caleb moved without thinking, putting himself between Pike and the porch. "She said no." Pike's attention swung to him, assessing. "And who the hell are you to speak for her?" "Someone who's heard enough." For a moment, nobody moved. The wolves' hands drifted toward their gun belts. Pike's eyes narrowed. Then Lydia's rifle cocked, loud in the silence. "Pike," she said softly. "You remember what happened to Harris when he tried to push me?" Pike's jaw worked. "That was different." "Was it?" She sighted down the barrel. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same." A long, tense silence. Then Pike smiled again, but it was uglier this time. "Fine," he said. "Keep your land, for now. But winter's coming, Lydia, and when the snow's deep and your hired man's frozen to death, we'll talk again." He swung back onto his horse. His companions followed suit, still watching Caleb like they were memorizing his face. They rode off at a leisurely pace, making it clear they weren't being run off, just choosing to leave. Caleb watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Lydia. She was lowering the rifle, her face pale but composed. That happen often? He asked. Often enough. She met his eyes. Thanks for stepping in. Didn't have to. Yes, I did. Something passed between them, not quite trust, but recognition. They were both fighting for the same thing, even if they disagreed on who it belonged to. Who's Harris? Caleb asked. First man who tried to take this place from me. Lydia's voice went flat. He's buried on the North Ridge. I can show you if you want. I believe you. Good. She went back inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the lingering smell of gun oil. Pike would be back. Men like that always came back. But for the first time since arriving, Caleb felt something other than despair. He felt needed. The work continued. 3 weeks became 4. The homestead stopped falling apart and started holding steady. Not thriving, that would take time and resources neither of them had, but surviving. Caleb learned Lydia's rhythms. She woke before dawn, worked until exhaustion claimed her, slept light with the rifle by her bed. She rarely smiled, never laughed, carried herself like someone who'd forgotten what ease felt like. She learned his too, that he knew the land because he'd claimed it, built it, bled for it, that he didn't complain or quit, that he'd positioned himself between her and Pike without hesitation, even though she'd held a gun on him just weeks earlier. Trust grew in the spaces between words. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of clearing brush, Lydia brought 2 bowls of stew to the lean-to instead of just one. She sat on an overturned bucket and ate in silence while Caleb sat on the hay. Month's up, she said finally. Caleb's heart sank. Yeah. You held up your end. So? She took a bite, chewed slowly. So tomorrow we ride to the county seat. File whatever paperwork needs filing to prove you ain't dead. He stared at her. You mean it? Don't make me repeat myself. She stood, bowl in hand. But Caleb, even if they put your name back on the register, I ain't leaving. You want this land back? You're going to have to figure out how we both fit on it. She walked away before he could respond. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He stared at the rafters and tried to imagine what came next. Co-owning land with a woman who'd aimed a rifle at him. Sharing space with someone who'd killed to protect what she'd claimed. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like possibility. The ride to the county seat took most of the day. Neither of them spoke much. Lydia kept her rifle across her saddle. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon, watching for trouble that didn't come. The town had changed in 3 years. More buildings, more people, more scars from a war that had devastated the South. Confederate flags had been torn down and burned. Union soldiers patrolled the streets, young and nervous in their blue uniforms. The county clerk's office was a cramped room that smelled like dust and old paper. The clerk himself was a thin man with spectacles and the harried look of someone drowning in bureaucracy. Help you? He asked without looking up. Need to report I'm not dead, Caleb said. That got the clerk's attention. He looked up, adjusted his glasses. Excuse me? Caleb Mercer, registered as deceased, but I'm standing right here, so I figure that paperwork's wrong. The clerk sighed like this was the 10th ghost he'd dealt with that week. War records? Confederate. 3rd Texas Infantry. Of course you were. He pulled out a massive ledger and started flipping pages. Mercer. Here. Listed as missing, presumed dead, as of April 1864. Wife filed for declaration of death in absentia February of this year. February. While he'd been in prison, dying slowly of disease and starvation, Sarah had been filing papers to erase him. I need that changed, Caleb said, his voice tight. Can do. Need proof of identity, though. Got any? My face? Not good enough. Anyone could claim to be Caleb Mercer. Got discharge papers, military identification? Anyone who can verify you are who you say you are? Caleb turned to Lydia. She looked uncomfortable. I only met him a month ago. That won't work, the clerk said. Need someone who knew you before the war. Family? Friends? Caleb's mind raced. His family was dead, parents gone to fever before he'd even claimed this land. Friends? Most had died in the war. The few who survived had scattered to wherever survival seemed possible. There's got to be another way, he said. The clerk softened slightly. Look, I believe you. Seen enough men come back from the dead these past few months. But the law is the law. Without proof, I can't just change the register because you asked nice. What about the land claim? Lydia asked. Could we register us both as owners? The clerk looked at her properly for the first time. You're Lydia Cross? The one who filed on the abandoned Mercer property? That's right. And you want to add him as co-owner? I don't want to do anything, Lydia said firmly. But he did the work, and he's standing here breathing. Seems like the practical solution. The clerk considered. It's unusual, but I suppose there's precedent. You'd both have equal claim to the land, both responsible for taxes and maintenance, both liable for debts. If one dies, the other inherits automatically. Fine, Lydia said. Fine, Caleb echoed. The clerk pulled out forms. Gonna need both your signatures and a filing fee. Lydia counted out coins from a small purse. The clerk filled out the paperwork with meticulous slowness, asking questions, recording answers. Finally, he had them both sign. Congratulations, he said dryly. You now officially own a piece of dying Texas land together. May you both live to regret it. They rode back in silence as the sun set. The land looked different to Caleb now, still his, but also Lydia's. Shared, compromised. Not what he'd fought for, but maybe what he needed. As they approached the cabin, Lydia finally spoke. This don't change anything, she said. You still sleep in the lean-to. You still don't come in the cabin unless I say. Understood. And if you ever try to claim you deserve more because you were here first, I'll remind you that you were dead and I brought you back. Fair enough. She glanced at him. Why'd you agree to this? Could have fought me. Could have found a way to prove who you are, get the land all to yourself. Maybe, Caleb said, but you were right back at the county seat. Practical solution. That's all? He thought about it. About Sarah leaving, about Thomas growing up without him, about walking 400 miles to find nothing, about Lydia aiming a rifle at him and then slowly lowering it. No, he admitted, but it's enough for now. She nodded, accepting the answer. They put the horses away together, splitting the work without discussion. When they were done, Lydia paused at the cabin door. Breakfast tomorrow, she said. Dawn, we need to talk about winter supplies. It was an invitation and a boundary all at once. I'll be there, Caleb said. She went inside. He returned to the lean-to, to his horse blanket and hay pile, and lay down. For the first time since the war ended, he slept without dreaming of what he'd lost. Winter supplies meant money they didn't have. Caleb sat at the kitchen table the next morning, nursing weak coffee while Lydia scratched numbers onto a piece of slate with a nub of chalk. The columns didn't balance no matter how many times she redid the math. We need flour, salt, sugar, powder, and shot, she said, not looking up. Medicine if we can afford it. Seeds for spring planting. New harness for the plow horse. The old one's about to snap. How much cash we got? $18. Maybe $20 if I sell the extra chickens, but then we lose the eggs. Caleb did the math in his head. Flour alone would cost $3 for enough to last the winter. Salt another $1. They were short by a lot. I could hire out, he offered. Town's got to need workers. Town's got more workers than jobs. Half of them are ex-soldiers like you, willing to work for nothing just to eat. She set down the chalk. We need something else. Like what? Pike's still offering for the land. Caleb's jaw tightened. No. Didn't say I was taking it, just said he's offering. She met his eyes. $300. That's what he quoted last time. $300 for 160 acres. That's robbery. I know, but it's $300 more than we have. She pushed back from the table. We got another option, though. Cattle drives forming up in town. They need drovers for the push north to the railhead in Kansas. Pays $50 a man, plus food. How long? 2 months, maybe 3. 2 months. That would put them into December, maybe January. The homestead would be vulnerable, and Lydia would be alone again. Can't leave you here by yourself, Caleb said. I managed before you showed up. Barely, and Pike's getting bolder. Lydia stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. You got a better idea? He didn't. That was the problem. The war had destroyed the economy, flooded the market with desperate men, and left people like them scrambling for scraps. The land was rich enough if you could survive long enough to work it, But survival cost money they didn't have. What if we both went? He said. She turned, eyebrows raised. On a cattle drive? Why not? You can ride, you can shoot. They might take a woman if she's willing to work. They won't pay a woman the same. So we lie. Cut your hair, bind your chest, call yourself Luke or something. I've seen it done. Lydia considered it, her face unreadable. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? She almost smiled. Almost. No, which is why it might work. 3 days later, they rode into town with the last of their cash and a story they'd practiced until it sounded true. Lydia had cut her hair short with kitchen shears, bound her chest flat with strips of cloth, and wore Caleb's spare shirt and an old pair of his pants cinched tight with rope. She looked like a young man, maybe 18, lean and hard from work. Remember, Caleb said as they approached the saloon where the drive boss was hiring, you're my cousin Luke. Don't talk much. Keep your voice low. Don't take your shirt off for any reason. I know, she said, her voice dropping to a rough rasp that sounded nothing like Lydia Cross. This ain't my first time pretending to be someone I'm not. He wanted to ask about that, but the saloon doors swung open and a man stepped out, tall, weathered, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. You here for the drive? He asked. Yes, sir, Caleb said. Both of us. The man looked them over with the practiced eye of someone who'd hired 1,000 cowboys and buried 50. Names? Caleb Mercer. This here's my cousin Luke. The man's gaze lingered on Lydia a beat too long, and Caleb's heart hammered. Then the man nodded. Jackson Moore, trail boss. You ever push cattle? Some, Caleb lied. Before the war. War. Moore spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Which side? Does it matter? Not to the cattle, Moore turned to Lydia. You talk, boy? When I got something to say, Lydia said in that rough rasp. Moore studied her face. You old enough to grow a beard? Old enough to work? That ain't what I asked. Caleb tensed, ready to intervene, but Lydia held steady. Lost my family to fever last year, she said. Been working since I was 10. Can ride, shoot, and ain't afraid of hard work. That old enough for you? It was a good story. Simple, sad, the kind of background half the men in Texas could claim. Moore considered, then nodded. $40 each. 3 months, maybe less if we don't run into trouble. We leave in 2 days. You don't show, you don't get paid. Clear? Clear, Caleb said. They shook on it and walked back to their horses. 40, not 50, Lydia muttered once they were out of earshot. Still better than nothing. Is it, though? $80 for 3 months? That's barely enough for winter supplies, and we're leaving the homestead empty. Caleb swung into his saddle. Then we better make sure nobody knows it's empty. They spent the next 2 days creating an illusion of occupancy. Caleb rigged a scarecrow inside the cabin that could be seen through the window, positioned to look like someone sitting at the table. They left a lantern burning low at night, fed by a slow drip of oil that would last weeks. They scattered hay and tools around the barn to suggest ongoing work. It wouldn't fool anyone who looked close, but from a distance it might make Pike think twice. The morning they left, Lydia stood on the porch and stared at the cabin like she was memorizing it. What if it's gone when we get back? She asked quietly. Then we build it again. Just like that? Just like that. She turned to him, and for a moment her guard dropped. He saw fear there, real and raw. This land was all she had, same as him. We'll come back, he said, and it'll still be here. She nodded once, sharp, and the guard went back up. Let's go before I change my mind. The cattle drive assembled outside town, 300 head of longhorns, mean and half wild, managed by 20 men who looked just as mean and twice as wild. Caleb and Lydia kept to themselves, setting up their bedrolls on the edge of camp. Moore rode through, assigning positions. Mercer, you're on drag. Luke, you're with him. Drag meant the back of the herd, eating dust and chasing stragglers. It was the worst position, reserved for new hands and men who hadn't proven themselves yet. Yes, sir, Caleb said. They fell in behind the herd as it started moving, and within an hour Caleb understood why drag was punishment. The dust was thick enough to choke on, coating their faces, their clothes, their horses. The stragglers were ornery, constantly breaking away to graze or investigate interesting smells. It was hot, miserable work. Lydia handled it without complaint, her face grim behind the bandana she'd tied over her nose and mouth. By the end of the first day, Caleb's back was screaming and his throat was raw. They made camp as the sun set, and the cook, a grizzled man everyone called Biscuit, served up beans and coffee that tasted like mud. The other drovers eyed them with the casual suspicion cowboys reserved for strangers. One man, younger than the rest with a cocky grin, wandered over as they ate. "You two brothers?" he asked. "Cousins," Caleb said. "Yeah? Don't look much alike." "Different mothers," the young drover laughed. "That happen a lot in your family?" Lydia stood abruptly. "Going to check the horses." She walked off into the darkness before Caleb could stop her. The drover watched her go. "Friendly sort, ain't he? Lost his family recent," Caleb said. "Still raw about it." "Ain't we all?" The drover extended a hand. "Name's Danny. Danny Fletcher." They shook. Danny settled onto a rock and pulled out a flask. "You want to pull? Helps with the dust." "I'm good. Suit yourself." Danny took a long drink, then wiped his mouth. "So where are you two from?" "South of here. Got a homestead near the ridge country." "And you left it to push cows?" Danny shook his head. "Man, you must be desperate or stupid." "Little of both." Danny laughed again, loud and easy. He seemed like the type who made friends quickly and enemies just as fast. "Well, welcome to hell. It gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets worse again." He wasn't wrong. The days blurred together into a rhythm of pain and exhaustion. Wake before dawn, gulp down Biscuit's terrible coffee, spend 14 hours in the saddle chasing cattle through heat and dust, collapse into a bedroll too tired to dream, repeat. The landscape changed slowly, rolling hills giving way to flatter country, trees becoming scarce, water holes increasingly precious. Caleb watched Lydia carefully, waiting for her disguise to slip, but she played the part perfectly. She kept her voice low, her movements masculine, her distance from the other men just right. Not so friendly they'd get suspicious, not so aloof they'd get curious. But staying invisible was harder than either of them had anticipated. 2 weeks into the drive, they stopped to water the herd at a muddy creek. The cattle were thirsty and unruly, pushing and shoving to reach the water. Caleb was trying to keep them from trampling each other when he heard shouting. He turned to see 2 drovers, big men, older than Danny, laughing at something. Then he saw what they were laughing at. They'd knocked Lydia off her horse. She was on the ground, scrambling back, and one of the men was reaching for her shirt. Caleb's vision went red. He was off his horse and moving before conscious thought caught up. He grabbed the reaching man by the shoulder, spun him around, and drove his fist into his face. The man went down hard. His companion swung at Caleb, catching him in the ribs. Pain exploded through his side, but he kept moving, ducking under the next punch and coming up with an uppercut that snapped the man's head back. Then someone grabbed Caleb from behind, arms locking around his chest. He struggled, but more hands joined in, pulling him back. "Enough!" Moore's voice cut through the chaos. "All of you, stand down!" The drovers released Caleb. He stood there breathing hard, ribs aching, staring at the 2 men he'd just fought. They were bleeding and angry, but they weren't moving. Moore rode between them, his face dark. "What in hell is going on?" "They attacked Luke," Caleb said. "Attacked?" One of the men spat blood. "We were just having fun. Kid can't take a joke." "Fun," Caleb repeated, his voice dangerous. "That what you call it?" "I call it none of your business," the man shot back. Moore looked at Lydia, who'd gotten to her feet and was dusting herself off. Her shirt was torn, but still in place. "That true, boy? They attack you?" Lydia's jaw was set. "They knocked me off my horse. I handled it." "Handled it by having your cousin fight your battles?" The man sneered. "What kind of man can't—" "The kind who don't need to prove nothing to you," Lydia cut in, her voice hard. "I was getting up when he jumped in." Moore studied them all with cold calculation. "This drive don't have room for fighting. You want to kill each other, wait until we get to Kansas. Until then, you work. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Caleb muttered. "Yes, sir," the others echoed. "Good. Mercer, you're moving to flank. Luke, you're staying on drag. Rest of you, get back to work before I dock your pay." The drovers scattered. Caleb started to follow Lydia, but Moore called him back. A word, Mercer. Caleb turned reluctantly. Moore dismounted and stood close enough that his voice wouldn't carry. That your cousin? Yes. You sure about that? Caleb's heart skipped, but he kept his face neutral. Why wouldn't I be? Because I've seen a lot of young men in my time, and that one moves wrong, sits wrong, something's off. Moore's eyes were sharp. Now, I don't care what anyone is as long as they do the work. But if there's a problem I should know about, speak up now. There's no problem. Moore waited, letting the silence stretch. Then he nodded slowly. All right. But Mercer, you start another fight, I'll leave you in the dirt. I don't care what the reason is. We clear? Clear. Get back to work. Caleb found Lydia watering her horse, her hands shaking slightly as she worked the pump. You all right? He asked quietly. Fine. You're not fine. What happened? She didn't look at him. They wanted to see if I was hiding something under my shirt. Said I looked too soft to be a real man. Caleb's hands clenched. I should have hit them harder. You shouldn't have hit them at all. She finally met his eyes. Now more suspicious. If he figures it out, he won't. You don't know that. I know we need this money. I know we're halfway to Kansas. I know turning back now means losing the homestead. He stepped closer. We stick to the plan. Keep your head down. 3 more weeks and we're done. She wanted to argue. He could see it, but practicality won out, same as always. 3 weeks, she said. Then I'm never pretending to be someone else again. She walked away before he could respond. The drive continued north, and the landscape turned stranger. Endless flat prairie that made Caleb feel exposed, vulnerable. They crossed rivers that were either too high or too low, navigated around settlements that didn't want cattle anywhere near them, and fought off small bands of thieves who thought 300 cows were easier pickings than they turned out to be. Caleb moved to flank position as ordered, which meant he and Lydia were separated during the day. He hated it. Every time he lost sight of her in the dust and chaos, his chest tightened. Not because he didn't trust her to handle herself, she'd proven she could, but because the other drovers were watching her now, whispering when they thought no one could hear. Danny Fletcher seemed to take it upon himself to befriend Lydia, which worried Caleb for different reasons. Your cousin's all right, Danny said one night as they sat around the fire. Quiet, but all right. Yeah. Where'd you say you two were from again? I didn't. Danny grinned. Secretive type. I respect that. He poked at the fire with a stick. You know, I got a sister back home. Reminds me of Luke, actually. Same stubborn streak. Same way of looking at you like she's deciding whether you're worth the trouble of talking to. Caleb's blood ran cold. That's so. Yeah, she ran off to work the railroads after Pa died. Dressed like a man, used a fake name, whole thing. Ma was furious, but Sarah, that's my sister, she didn't care. Said she'd rather work honest than marry some fool who'd treat her like property. What happened to her? Still working, far as I know. Sends money home sometimes. Danny glanced at him. Point is, I get it. Why someone might pretend to be something they're not. World ain't fair to folks who don't fit the mold. Caleb chose his words carefully. Luke's had a hard time, lost everything, just trying to survive. Ain't we all? Danny stood and stretched. Well, I ain't saying nothing to nobody. Your cousin's business is your cousin's business. Just wanted you to know that if there's trouble, I got your back. He walked off into the darkness, leaving Caleb to wonder if that was a threat or an offer of alliance. The next morning, they woke to find 3 cattle missing and tracks leading east. Moore gathered the drovers as the sun rose. Rustlers. Probably the same one's been following us for days. We can't afford to lose cattle, so we're going after them. All of us? Someone asked. No, most of you keep the herd moving. I'm taking 5 men. Moore's gaze swept the group. Mercer, Danny, Wilson, Carter, and Luke. Mount up. Lydia opened her mouth to protest, but Caleb caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Refusing would raise more questions than going. They rode east at a hard pace, following the tracks through scrub brush and rocky terrain. The rustlers weren't trying to hide. They'd left a clear trail, which meant either they were stupid or they wanted to be followed. Caleb suspected the latter. Spread out, Moore ordered. Keep your eyes open. This smells like a trap. They fanned out, moving slower now, hands on their guns. The tracks led to a narrow canyon, and Caleb's instincts screamed danger. Boss, he called, maybe we should... Gunfire erupted from the canyon walls. Caleb threw himself off his horse as bullets kicked up dirt around him. He heard shouting, more gunfire, someone screaming. He crawled behind a boulder and drew his pistol, trying to see where the shots were coming from. The canyon walls. At least 4 shooters, maybe more. "Fall back," Moore shouted. "Fall back!" They retreated in chaos, leaving one man, Wilson, bleeding in the dirt. Caleb wanted to go back for him, but Moore grabbed his arm. "He's dead! Move!" They made it out of range and regrouped, breathing hard. Carter was wounded, a bullet through his shoulder. Danny was pale but unhurt. Lydia was gone. "Where's Luke?" Caleb demanded. "Thought he was with you," Danny said. Panic clawed at Caleb's chest. He started back toward the canyon, but Moore blocked him. "You go back in there, you're dead too." "I don't care, that's my Your cousin, I know. And I'm sorry, but we got a herd to move and wounded to tend. We can't sacrifice more men for—" A gunshot rang out from inside the canyon, followed by another, then silence. Then Lydia appeared, riding hard, leading 3 stolen cattle and Wilson's horse. Blood was splattered across her shirt, but she didn't look wounded. She reined up beside them, breathing hard. "Got them." "Got who?" Moore asked. "The rustlers, 4 of them. They won't be stealing any more cattle." The men stared at her, at the blood, at the cold certainty in her eyes. "You killed 4 men?" Danny asked. "They shot Wilson. They shot at us. They tried to kill us." Lydia's voice was flat. "So yes, I killed 4 men." Moore studied her for a long moment. "How?" "Waited until they thought we'd all run, circled around behind them. They never saw me coming." She looked at each of them in turn. "Anyone have a problem with that?" No one spoke. "Good," Moore said finally. "Let's get back to the herd." They rode in silence, the stolen cattle plodding along obediently. Caleb kept glancing at Lydia, but she stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. That night, after the herd was settled and the wounded tended, Caleb found her sitting alone, cleaning her rifle. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." "Lydia, don't." She looked at him and her eyes were hard. "Don't ask me if I feel bad. Don't ask me if I'm haunted. Don't ask me any of it." "I wasn't going to." "Yes, you were." She went back to cleaning. "They were going to kill us. They already killed Wilson, so I killed them first. That's all there is to it." "I know." "Do you?" She set down the rifle. "Because you're looking at me like I'm different now. Like I'm broken or damaged or—" "I'm looking at you like someone who's grateful you came back alive," Caleb interrupted. "That's all." She searched his face, looking for lies. Found none. "Oh," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. "I've killed before," she said eventually. "Told you that. Man named Harris who tried to take the homestead, and others. Back when I was married." "You were married?" "For 2 years. To a man who thought his wife was property he could beat whenever the mood struck." She said it matter-of-fact, like reporting the weather. "I put up with it until the day he raised a hand to someone else's child. Then I put a kitchen knife between his ribs and left him bleeding on the floor." Caleb absorbed this. That while you were traveling when you found the homestead, running's more accurate. His family wanted revenge. County wanted to hang me. So I ran. She picked up the rifle again. Found the homestead empty, filed the claim, figured I'd disappear into the land. Then you showed up. "Sorry about that," she almost smiled. "Don't be. Turns out having someone around isn't the worst thing." High praise. Best you're getting. 3 more weeks passed. The herd reached Kansas without further incident, and they drove the cattle into the stockyards outside the railroad town. The buyer was a heavy man in an expensive suit who looked at the Longhorns like they were made of gold. Moore collected payment and distributed wages, $40 each as promised, plus a $10 bonus for Lydia. "For the rustlers," Moore said when he handed it over. "That was brave work, boy. Stupid, but brave." "Thank you, sir." Moore hesitated. "You ever need work again, you come find me. I could use someone with your particular skills." They left Kansas the next morning, riding hard for home. The return trip took half the time without the herd to slow them down. They barely spoke, both anxious about what they'd find. The homestead came into view at sunset on the 3rd day. It was still standing. Caleb's chest loosened. The cabin, the barn, the fence, all intact. No signs of fire or destruction. Pike hadn't come. Or if he had, the illusion had worked. They dismounted in the yard and Lydia pulled off her hat. Her short hair stuck up at odd angles. She looked at the cabin, then at Caleb. "We did it," she said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We did. $80, plus the 10. That's enough for winter supplies and then some. Enough to breathe for a while." She nodded, still staring at the cabin. Then she did something Caleb had never seen her do before. She smiled. Really smiled. Not the bitter half-smiles or smirks, but a genuine expression of relief and something close to happiness. "Come on," she said. "Let's see if the scarecrow fooled anyone." The cabin was exactly as they'd left it. Dust covered everything, but nothing was missing or broken. They'd gotten away with it. That night, Lydia cooked a real meal, the first in months, and they ate at the table like civilized people instead of exhausted drovers shoveling down food between shifts. "Tomorrow we go to town for supplies," Lydia said. "Get everything we need before winter hits." "Agreed." "And Caleb?" She met his eyes. "Thank you for jumping in when those men came at me. For having my back out there. You had mine too." "I know. That's why I'm thanking you." She stood and started clearing dishes. "You can sleep in the cabin tonight. Too cold for the lean-to." It was the first time she'd invited him inside without qualification. "You sure?" "Don't make me repeat myself." He helped clean up, and they settled into an awkward silence. There was only one bed, Lydia's, and the floor wasn't much better than the lean-to. "I'll take the floor," he said. "Don't be stupid. Bed's big enough for two. Just stay on your side." So they lay down, fully clothed, a careful foot of space between them. Caleb stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of her breathing, the warmth radiating from her side of the bed. "Caleb?" "Yeah? This arrangement we got, it working for you?" He thought about it, about the past months, the cattle drive, the way they'd learned to move around each other like parts of the same machine. "Yeah," he said. "It's working. Good, because I think we might actually survive this." She rolled over, presenting her back to him, and within minutes her breathing evened out into sleep. Caleb lay awake longer, thinking about survival and what it meant. He'd come back to reclaim a life that no longer existed. Instead, he'd found something stranger and more complicated, a partnership built on necessity and defended with blood. It wasn't what he'd wanted, but lying there in this darkness, listening to Lydia breathe, he thought maybe it was enough. Outside, winter was coming, but inside, for the first time in years, Caleb felt warm. The first snow came in November, light flurries that melted by noon but promised worse to come. Caleb stood on the porch watching the clouds gather over the ridgeline, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Inside, Lydia was sorting through their winter supplies, taking inventory for the third time that week. She'd become obsessive about it after they'd returned from Kansas, counting sacks of flour, measuring out salt portions, calculating how long everything would last if the winter ran long. "We're fine," Caleb had told her 2 days ago. "We're fine until we're not," she'd replied, not looking up from her ledger. He understood. The cattle drive money had bought them security, but security was fragile out here. One bad storm, one sick animal, one broken wagon wheel could tip everything back into desperation. The town had changed too. More Union soldiers patrolling, more rules about who could trade and who couldn't. Former Confederates like Caleb were watched with suspicion, their money inspected like it might be counterfeit. He'd stopped going to town after the third time a soldier had questioned where he'd gotten his cash. Lydia went instead, her hair grown out enough now to look deliberately short rather than hastily cut. She'd stopped binding her chest, stopped deepening her voice. The deception was over, and she seemed relieved to be done with it. But the town had noticed the change, noticed that Lydia Cross, the widow who'd claimed abandoned land, now had a man living with her. The whispers had started immediately. "Heard they're shacking up," someone had said loud enough for Lydia to hear at the general store. "Ain't proper," another voice had added. "Woman like that, taking in a strange man." Lydia had bought her supplies and left without responding, but Caleb had seen the tightness in her jaw when she'd returned home. "Let them talk," he'd said. "Easy for you to say. They're not calling you a whore." The word had hung between them, sharp and ugly. "Anyone says that to your face, I'll handle it," Caleb had promised. "I can handle my own problems." I know you can. Doesn't mean you have to. She'd looked at him then with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and frustration, and something else he didn't have a name for. Now, standing on the porch with his cold coffee, Caleb heard the door open behind him. You going to drink that or just hold it? Lydia asked. Thinking. About what? Pike. He turned to face her. He's been quiet too long. Maybe he gave up. Men like Pike don't give up. They wait. Caleb set down the cup. We humiliated him, turned down his offer, stood up to him in front of his men. He's not going to forget that. Lydia leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. She was wearing one of her regular shirts now, no binding, and it changed her silhouette in ways Caleb had tried very hard not to notice. So what do we do? She asked. We prepare. Make sure the rifles are loaded, keep watch at night, don't go anywhere alone. I've been doing that for months. I know, but now we both do it. She studied him for a moment. You think he'll come during winter? I think winter's when we're most vulnerable. Deep snow, limited supplies, harder to get help from town. Caleb moved to the railing. It's what I do. Comforting. You want me to lie? No. She sighed. I want you to be wrong, but I know you're not. They stood in silence, watching the snow flurries increase. The wind was picking up, carrying the bite of true winter. Come inside, Lydia said finally. Getting too cold out here. They'd fallen into an easy routine over the past weeks. Caleb still slept on his side of the bed, Lydia on hers, that careful space maintained between them. They worked the land together during the day, shared meals, talked about practical things, fence repairs, spring planting, whether they could afford another horse. What they didn't talk about was the way the space between them in bed had been shrinking, or how Caleb had caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, or how Lydia's hand sometimes lingered when she passed him something at dinner. It was easier not to acknowledge it, safer. December brought the first real storm, 3 feet of snow that trapped them inside for 2 days. They passed the time playing cards, with the deck so worn the suits were barely visible, telling stories about their lives before they'd met. I wanted to be a teacher, Lydia said on the second day, staring at her cards. Before I got married. Thought I'd open a school somewhere, teach reading and arithmetic to children. Why didn't you? My father said teaching was for spinsters and women who couldn't catch a husband. She laid down a card. So I caught a husband instead, worst decision I ever made. You could still teach. Out here? Who'd I teach? Nearest family with children is 10 miles away. She drew another card. That life's gone. This is what I got now. Caleb wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't too late, that she could still have what she wanted. But he knew better. The war had killed more than soldiers. It had killed possibilities. I wanted to build something that lasted, he said instead. Something I could pass down to my son. Legacy, I guess. That why you came back? For the legacy? I came back because I didn't know what else to do. He set down his cards. The war broke something in me, made everything else seem pointless. Coming home was the only thing that made sense. Even though home was gone? Even though... Lydia reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately since the night she'd killed the rustlers. It's not gone, she said quietly. We're building it again. Different, but still here. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long moment, connected across the worn table, the storm howling outside. Then Lydia pulled away, standing abruptly. I should check on the animals. It's still snowing. They need water. She grabbed her coat and went out into the storm before he could argue. Caleb sat alone at the table, staring at his hand where hers had been, trying to understand what had just happened. The storm passed, but the tension between them didn't. They moved around each other carefully now, overly polite, making sure not to touch. It was worse than the suspicious distance of those first weeks. At least then they'd had a reason for the space. Now there was no reason except fear of what might happen if they closed it. Christmas came and went unmarked. They had no decorations, no special food, no reason to celebrate. It was just another cold day in a string of cold days. But on New Year's Eve, Lydia made cornbread from their dwindling flour supplies and opened a jar of preserves she'd been saving. What's the occasion? Caleb asked. We survived the year. She set the cornbread on the table. That's worth something. They ate dinner slowly, making it last, and when darkness fell, Caleb built up the fire until the cabin was warm enough to shed their extra layers. What do you think the new year brings? Lydia asked, staring into the flames. More of the same, probably. Work, winter, trying not to die. Optimistic. Realistic. She smiled slightly. What if it could be different? What if we could make something better? Like what? I don't know. She pulled her knees to her chest. A real ranch, maybe. More cattle, more land. Enough money that we're not always one disaster away from losing everything. That's a good dream. But dreams cost money we don't have. We could get it. Take on investors, partner with other homesteaders, build something bigger than just the two of us. Caleb studied her face in the firelight. She looked younger when she talked about the future, less guarded. You really think we could do that? He asked. I think we could do anything if we stopped being so careful with each other. The words hung in the air between them. Lydia, I know what I'm saying. She met his eyes. I know what it means. I'm not some naive girl who doesn't understand the consequences. Then you know this is a bad idea. Why? Because the town already thinks we're sleeping together? Because it complicates the land ownership? Because you're still in love with your wife who left you? I'm not in love with Sarah. Then what's stopping you? Everything, he wanted to say. The fact that Lydia deserved better than a broken soldier with nothing to offer. The fact that mixing partnership with anything else was asking for disaster. The fact that he was terrified of losing the one good thing the war hadn't destroyed. But instead he said, nothing. She stood and crossed the small space between them. Then stop being careful. He stood too, and the distance between them disappeared. When he kissed her, she tasted like cornbread and preserves and something wild he didn't have a name for. They barely made it to the bed. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Lydia's head on his chest, Caleb waited for regret or panic or some indication that they'd made a terrible mistake. It didn't come. Well, Lydia said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement, that was inevitable. Was it? From the moment you wouldn't leave the porch. She traced a pattern on his chest. I knew you'd be trouble, says the woman who aimed a rifle at me. You deserved it. Probably. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking at him seriously. This doesn't change anything about the land. We're still partners, still equals. I know. And if this doesn't work out, we figure out how to live together anyway. Because I'm not leaving, and neither are you. Agreed. Good. She settled back against him. Just so we're clear. They fell asleep like that, tangled together without the careful space, and Caleb slept better than he had in years. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Caleb was outside splitting wood when he saw the riders. 3 of them, moving fast across the snow-covered valley. He recognized Pike's bulk immediately. Lydia, he called. She emerged from the cabin, rifle already in hand. She'd developed an instinct for danger that probably came from living alone so long. The riders stopped at the property line. Pike dismounted, but his 2 companions stayed on their horses, hands near their guns. Morning, Lydia, Pike called. Mercer? Pike. Lydia's voice was cold. You're on my land. Our land, Caleb corrected quietly. Right. Heard about that. Pike walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. Heard a lot of things, actually. Heard you 2 are playing house. Heard the town's all scandalized about it. What we do ain't your business, Lydia said. Maybe not, but I'm making it my business. Pike stopped about 10 feet away. See? I got a new offer for you. $500 for the land. That's generous considering the circumstances. What circumstances? Caleb asked. Pike grinned. The circumstance of you 2 living in sin. The circumstance of decent folks not wanting to do business with a woman who takes up with strange men. The circumstance of winter being hard and you running low on supplies. We're fine, Lydia said. Are you? Because word around town is the general store's raising prices on you, and the feedlot ain't selling you hay anymore, and the bank won't extend credit to a woman of questionable morals. Caleb's hands clenched. You're blackmailing her. I'm offering a solution. $500. You take it, go somewhere nobody knows you, start fresh. Pike's smile widened. Or you stay, watch the town squeeze you dry until you're begging to sell for any price at all. Get off our land, Lydia said, her rifle coming up slightly. Pike didn't move. Think about it. You got until spring. After that, my offer drops to 300. And if you're still here by summer, he shrugged. Well, accidents happen. Fires start, people disappear. You understand. That's a threat, Caleb said. That's reality. Pike remounted his horse. Happy New Year, folks. Hope it's your last one here. They rode off, leaving tracks in the snow that led back toward town. Caleb turned to Lydia. We need to go to the law.
What law? The Union soldiers who already think we're Confederate trash? The county sheriff who's Pike's drinking buddy? She lowered the rifle, her hands shaking slightly. There's no law out here except what we make. Then we make it. How? I don't know yet. He took the rifle from her and set it aside, then pulled her close. She was trembling, but whether from cold or anger or fear, he couldn't tell. But we're not selling, and we're not running. He's right about the town. They're not going to help us. Then we don't need the town. She pulled back to look at him. You can't fight a whole community. Watch me. But as the days passed, Pike's words proved true. The general store did raise their prices. Not enough to refuse service outright, but enough to hurt. The feedlot claimed they were out of hay, even though Caleb could see bales stacked in their barn. Other homesteaders who'd been friendly before now crossed the street to avoid them. The isolation was calculated and effective. We need to plant early, Lydia said one evening, staring at their diminishing supplies. Get a garden going as soon as the snow melts. Can't rely on the town for anything. Agreed. What about livestock? Got the chickens and the milk cow. Could use another horse for plowing, but we can't afford it. Caleb did the math in his head. We got enough to last until March, maybe April, if we're careful. After that we starve or sell. Or we find another way. What other way? Lydia slammed her ledger closed. We're alone out here, Caleb. Pike's made sure of that. Nobody's going to help us. Nobody's going to trade with us. And come spring, we'll have nothing to sell and no way to buy seed. Then we ask for help somewhere else. There's other towns. Other towns where we don't have land? Where we're just two more desperate people looking for work that doesn't exist? She stood, pacing. This is exactly what Pike wanted, to squeeze us until we have no choice. Caleb caught her arm as she passed. Hey, look at me. She did, and he saw fear in her eyes, real, raw fear that she'd been hiding behind anger. We survived the war, he said. We survived a cattle drive with our secret intact. We survived winter so far. We can survive this. Can we? Her voice cracked slightly. Because I'm not sure anymore. I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting for every inch, tired of being afraid, tired of watching everything I build get threatened by men who think they deserve it more. He pulled her close, feeling her body sag against his. I know. I'm tired too. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other up. What if we can't win? She whispered. Then we go down fighting. January brought more snow and more isolation. They worked together in silence, conserving their energy and their supplies. The cold was brutal, the kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Caleb chopped wood until his hands bled, keeping the fire going day and night. Lydia rationed their food with grim precision, making meals that filled their stomachs but left them still hungry. And every night they lay together in the bed, holding on to each other like they were the last solid thing in a world that kept shifting. Tell me something good, Lydia said one night, her voice drowsy. Like what? Anything. A memory, a story, something that doesn't hurt. Caleb thought back through years of pain and loss, searching for something untainted. My mother used to make apple pie every Sunday. She'd let me help roll out the crust, and I'd always make it too thin or too thick, but she never corrected me. Just said practice makes better, not perfect. What happened to her? Fever took her when I was 16. My father followed a year later. He stroked Lydia's hair absently. They'd have liked you. Why? Because you're strong. My mother always said strength was the only virtue worth having. Everything else was just decoration. Lydia was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said, I think I would have liked them too. February came with a thaw that promised spring but delivered ice storms instead. The animals huddled in the barn, miserable and hungry. The vegetable stores were running critically low.
And on a gray afternoon when the sky looked like bruised metal, Pike returned. This time he brought 6 men. Caleb saw them coming from the ridge and his blood went cold. 6 armed men on horseback, moving with purpose. This wasn't a social call. This was an ending. "Lydia," he called, his voice tight. She came out immediately, reading his tone. When she saw the riders, her face went pale. "Get the extra rifles," Caleb said, "and the ammunition." "Caleb, there's 6 of them." "I know. Get the guns." She ran inside. Caleb picked up the axe he'd been using and positioned himself in the center of the yard. Not behind cover. That would look like he was hiding. He needed to look confident, even though his heart was trying to punch through his ribs. Pike and his men rode right up to the cabin this time, surrounding him in a loose semicircle. The message was clear. "You're outnumbered. You're outgunned. This is over." "Caleb Mercer," Pike said, like he was greeting an old friend. "Time's up. I want an answer." "Answer's still no." "That's disappointing," Pike gestured to his men. "See, I brought witnesses this time. These fine gentlemen are going to watch me make one last generous offer, $500. You take it, pack up your woman, and leave by sundown. And if we don't, then I stop being generous." Lydia stepped out of the cabin, a rifle in each hand. She tossed one to Caleb and kept the other, positioning herself on the porch with a clear line of fire. 6 against 2, Pike observed. "Those ain't good odds." "For you, maybe," Lydia said. One of Pike's men laughed. "She's got spirit, Pike. Shame to waste it." "Ain't being wasted," Pike said. "Just being redirected." He looked at Caleb. "Last chance. Take the money or take the consequences." Caleb raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at Pike's chest. "Get off our land." The world held its breath. Then Pike smiled. "Have it your way." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. They were coming back, and next time they wouldn't talk first. That night they didn't sleep. They prepared. Caleb moved through the cabin methodically, checking every rifle, counting ammunition, testing the mechanisms. They had 3 working rifles and 2 pistols between them, not enough against 6 men, but enough to make Pike's victory expensive. Lydia was at the table drawing a crude map of the property, marking sight lines and defensive positions. "They'll come at night," she said, not looking up. "Pike's not stupid. He'll use the darkness." "Agreed." Caleb set down a rifle and picked up another. "Question is when?" "Soon. He's made his final offer. Waiting just gives us time to prepare or get help." "We're not getting help." "I know." She finished the map and pushed it toward him. "So we use the land. We know it better than they do." Caleb studied her sketch. The cabin sat in a small depression with the barn to the west and a creek bed to the east. The northern approach was open, but the southern side had thick brush and trees. "If they're smart, they come from the north," he said. "Fast approach, clear field of fire." "So we make the north approach suicide." Lydia traced a line on the map. "We dig pits here and here, cover them with brush. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to break a horse's leg. That slows them down and gives away our position. We're not hiding in the cabin. That's a coffin if they get close enough." She tapped the creek bed. "We hide here. Let them come to the cabin, find it empty, and we hit them from behind." It was a good plan, risky, but better than waiting inside to be burned out or shot through the windows. "How much time do we have?" Caleb asked. "Day, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Lydia met his eyes. "We start digging now." They worked through the night and into the next day, taking turns sleeping in short shifts. The ground was half frozen, making every shovelful a battle. Caleb's back screamed in protest. His hands blistered raw, but he kept digging. Lydia worked beside him, her face set in grim determination. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. By evening, they had 3 shallow pits dug across the northern approach, camouflaged with brush and dead grass. They'd also moved supplies to the creek bed: ammunition, water, blankets, and dried meat. If the fight went long, they'd need to outlast Pike's patience. As darkness fell, they retreated to the cabin one last time. "Might be the last night we sleep here," Lydia said quietly, looking around at the rough walls and simple furniture. "We'll sleep here again," Caleb said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "You don't know that." "No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway."
She smiled faintly. Optimism doesn't suit you. Neither does dying. They ate a cold dinner, not wanting to risk a fire that would announce their presence. Then they lay down in the bed together, fully clothed and armed, listening to the wind howl outside. Caleb? Lydia's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, she rolled to face him. I want you to know I don't regret any of this. Not claiming the land, not staying when you showed up, not what happened between us. I'd do it all again. He pulled her close, breathing in the smell of her hair, wood smoke and soap, and something uniquely Lydia. Me too, he said. They held each other until sleep came, fitful and filled with half-dreams of fire and gunshots. Caleb woke to Lydia shaking his shoulder. Her hand was over his mouth, her eyes urgent in the pre-dawn gloom. He heard it then. Horses. Multiple horses, moving quietly but not quietly enough. They were here. They rolled out of bed silently, grabbing rifles and ammunition. Lydia blew out the lamp they'd left burning low, and they slipped out the back door, moving fast and low toward the creek bed. Behind them, the cabin sat dark and still, a trap waiting to be sprung. They settled into their position just as the first gray light touched the horizon. From here they could see the northern approach clearly. 6 riders were picking their way forward, spread out in a line. Pike was in the center, bigger and slower than the others. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. No more threats, no more warnings, just violence and the question of who would survive it. The first rider hit the pit at full trot. The horse screamed as its front legs buckled, throwing the rider forward. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. The other riders scattered, shouting in confusion. One more hit a pit, his horse stumbling but not falling. The others reined up hard, trying to understand what was happening. Now! Pike's voice cut through the chaos. The cabin! Get to the cabin! They charged forward, 3 riders converging on the dark building. Caleb watched them dismount, kick in the door, disappear inside. 30 seconds later, they emerged, looking confused and angry. Empty! One shouted. Nobody's here! Pike swore viciously. Spread out! They're close! The riders fanned out, searching. 1 moved toward the barn, 2 toward the creek bed. Caleb sighted down his rifle at the nearest man. Beside him, Lydia did the same. Wait, he whispered. Let them get closer. The men advanced cautiously now, rifles raised, checking every shadow. The one heading for the barn was 20 yards away. The 2 approaching the creek bed were 15, 10 yards. Now, Caleb said. They fired simultaneously. Caleb's shot took his target in the chest, dropping him instantly. Lydia's man fell clutching his leg, screaming. The other riders scattered, returning fire blindly. Bullets kicked up dirt around their position. Caleb rolled left, found new cover, fired again. Missed. The rider had dropped behind a water trough. Lydia was reloading with practiced speed, her face calm despite the chaos. She brought her rifle up and fired at a muzzle flash near the barn. Someone cried out. 3 down, she said. Maybe 4. Pike's still moving, Caleb replied, tracking the big man as he ran for the cabin. And he's got at least 2 others with him. Pike reached the cabin and took cover behind the corner, shouting orders Caleb couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. The 2 remaining riders converged on the cabin from different angles, creating a defensive position. Standoff. Caleb and Lydia had cover and good sight lines. Pike and his men had the cabin and could wait them out. Nobody could advance without getting shot. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the yard. Caleb could see the bodies clearly. 2 definitely dead, 1 crawling toward his horse, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. We need to finish this, Lydia said, before more show up. I'm open to suggestions. She thought for a moment, then started pulling off her coat. I'm going to circle around through the brush, get behind them. That's suicide. It's tactical. She checked her pistol. You keep them pinned down from here. I come up from the south. We have them in a crossfire. Lydia, you got a better plan? He didn't, and they both knew waiting favored Pike. Give me 10 minutes to get in position, she said. Then start shooting, loud and angry. Make them focus on you. If you get killed, then you better win anyway. She kissed him hard and fast. 10 minutes. She disappeared into the brush before he could argue further. Caleb watched her go, his chest tight with fear and fury. Then he checked his ammunition and started counting down from 600. At 300 seconds, he opened fire.
He didn't aim to kill, just to keep heads down. He fired at the cabin corners, the windows, the water trough. Rapid shots that forced Pike's men to stay in cover. Someone fired back, bullets thudding into the creek bank. Caleb shifted position, fired again from a different angle. Make them think there were more defenders. Keep them guessing. At 100 seconds, he heard shouting from behind the cabin. A gunshot. Another. Then Lydia's voice, hard and cold. "Drop it!" Caleb rose from cover and advanced on the cabin, rifle raised. One of Pike's men stumbled out the front door, hands raised, blood running from a gash on his head.
"She's crazy!" he shouted. "She came out of nowhere." Caleb kept his rifle on the man. "Where's Pike?" "Back of the cabin. With Dalton." Caleb circled wide, keeping the cabin between himself and Pike's position. He reached the corner and peered around. Lydia had both men on the ground. Pike was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Dalton lay flat on his face, unconscious or dead. "Drop the rifle, Pike," Lydia said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline and exhaustion. Pike looked up at her with pure hatred. "You killed my men. You came to kill us first. This land should be mine. I was here before you, working deals, building relationships. You were a vulture, waiting for people to die so you could pick the bones," Lydia interrupted. "That's not the same as earning something." Pike's hand moved slightly, reaching for something in his belt. Caleb fired. The shot was instinct, no thought involved. The bullet took Pike in the hand, destroying whatever weapon he'd been reaching for. Pike screamed and collapsed sideways. Caleb stepped around the corner, rifle still raised. "It's over, Pike. You lost." Pike was gasping, cradling his ruined hand against his bloody shoulder. "You think this changes anything? The town still hates you. They'll still squeeze you. I'm not the only one who wants you gone." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but you're the only one dumb enough to try it with guns." Movement behind him. The man from the front door was running for the horses. Caleb let him go. One witness was better than none. Someone to tell the town what happened here. Lydia was checking Dalton's pulse. "He's alive. Barely." "What do we do with them?" "Load them on horses and send them back to town. Let everyone see what happens when you come for us." It took an hour to round up the horses, tie the wounded men to their saddles, and point them toward town. Pike kept cursing the whole time, promising revenge, threatening lawsuits and vigilante justice. Caleb ignored him. Empty threats from a beaten man. When the last horse disappeared over the ridge, Caleb and Lydia stood in their yard surrounded by the evidence of violence. Blood in the snow, broken fences, bullet holes in the cabin walls. "We should bury the dead ones," Lydia said quietly. They dug graves on the north ridge, where the wind was strong and nothing grew. Quick, shallow graves with no markers. The men had come to kill them. They didn't deserve anything more. By the time they finished, both were exhausted and filthy, covered in dirt and blood and sweat. Lydia stood at the edge of the graves, staring down. "I killed 2 men today, maybe 3. They would have killed us." "I know, doesn't make it easier." Caleb took her hand. "Come on, let's go home." They walked back to the cabin together, and for the first time in months, Caleb felt something close to peace. They'd defended their land. They'd survived. They'd won. But as they reached the porch, Lydia stopped. "Someone's coming," she said. Caleb turned, hand going to his pistol. A single rider was approaching from the east, moving at an easy pace. Not attacking, just riding. As the figure got closer, Caleb saw it was a woman. Middle-aged, wearing a travel-worn coat and riding a good horse. She had a saddlebag that looked heavy and a certain confidence in her posture. She reined up at the property line and called out, "Caleb Mercer?" Every muscle in Caleb's body tensed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Martha Gaines. I'm a mail courier out of San Antonio." She reached into her saddlebag. "Got a letter here for Caleb Mercer. You him?" "I am." Martha rode closer and held out an envelope. "Postmarked from California. Been chasing you for 3 months. County office finally told me where to find you." California. Caleb's hand trembled as he took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Sarah's handwriting. "Thank you," he managed. Martha nodded. "You folks look like you've had a rough morning. Need anything? Doctor, maybe?" "We're fine. Lydia said, though she was staring at the letter too. Suit yourself. Martha tipped her hat. Good luck to you both. She rode off, leaving them alone with the envelope. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. 3 years since he'd heard from Sarah. 3 years of wondering, imagining, trying not to hope. And now this. You want me to leave while you read it? Lydia asked quietly. No. He turned the envelope over in his hands. Stay. They went inside the cabin and Caleb sat at the table. Lydia stood by the window, giving him space but not leaving. He opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was short. Sarah's handwriting was still neat, still precise, still everything he remembered.
Caleb, I heard you came back. The county clerk wrote to tell me you'd filed to reclaim the land. I wanted you to know I'm glad you're alive. I truly am. I also wanted you to know I've remarried. His name is Daniel Shaw. He's a good man, a merchant here in Sacramento. He treats Thomas well and provides for us in ways I couldn't manage alone. Thomas is growing fast. He's nearly 8 now, healthy and happy. He doesn't remember you much, which I know must hurt. I'm sorry for that, but starting over was the only way we could survive. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I did what I had to do, same as you did what you had to do in the war. We both made choices we can't take back. But I'm asking you not to come here, not to try to reclaim something that no longer exists. Thomas has a father now, a home, stability. Disrupting that would only hurt him. I hope you understand. I hope you found some kind of peace in Texas. I hope the land treats you better than the war did. Sarah Caleb read it twice, then set it down carefully on the table. She remarried, he said, his voice hollow. Lydia didn't move from the window. I'm sorry. She's asking me not to come, not to try to see my son. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? He could go to California, track down Sarah and Daniel Shaw, demand to see Thomas, assert his rights as the boy's father, tear apart the life Sarah had built and force his way back into his son's world. Or he could let go. Caleb stood and walked to the window beside Lydia. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, melting the snow in patches. The land looked tired but alive, damaged but still there. Thomas has a father, he said quietly, a man who was there when I wasn't, a man who chose to raise him when I was... He stopped, unable to finish. When you were fighting a war you didn't choose, Lydia said. When you were in prison, when you were walking 400 miles to come home. Doesn't matter, I wasn't there, Sarah's right about that. So what do you want to do? He thought about it, really thought about it. About writing to California and finding a boy who didn't remember him. About explaining to Thomas why he'd disappeared, why Sarah had moved on, why everything was so complicated. About destroying a child's sense of stability for the sake of his own need to matter. I want to write back, he said finally. Tell Sarah I'm not coming. Tell her to give Thomas a good life. Tell her I understand. Lydia turned to look at him. You sure? No, but it's the right thing anyway. That's the hardest kind of decision. Yeah. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. But I'm not that man anymore. The one who left for war. The one who walked back expecting everything to be frozen in time. He gestured at the cabin, the land, the life they'd built together. I'm this man now. And this man has something worth staying for. Lydia's arms tightened around him. What if you regret it? I probably will. Some days more than others. He pulled back to look at her. But I'll regret it less than I'd regret losing you. She kissed him then, soft and careful, like he might break. When they separated, she said, we should fix the fence and patch the bullet holes and figure out what to tell the town when they come asking. Always practical. Someone has to be. They spent the rest of the day repairing the damage from the fight. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Caleb found himself thinking about Sarah less and less as the hours passed. Instead, he thought about spring planting, about expanding the garden, about maybe buying a few head of cattle and building the ranch Lydia had dreamed about futures instead of pasts. As evening fell, they sat on the porch together, exhausted and sore. Caleb had written his letter to Sarah, short, clean, final. He'd post it in town tomorrow. You think Pike will come back? Lydia asked. Not Pike, but someone else eventually. There's always someone else. Comforting. Realistic. He took her hand. But we beat Pike. We can beat the next one too. Together? Together. She rested her head on his shoulder. I like the sound of that. They sat in silence as the stars came out one by one. The land stretched around them, dark and endless in theirs. Caleb had come back to reclaim a life that no longer existed. Instead, he'd found something he'd never expected, a partnership forged in necessity, tempered by violence, and transformed into something that felt like home. It wasn't what he'd wanted, but it was what he needed. And for the first time since the war ended, Caleb Mercer felt like he belonged somewhere, not because of the past, because of the future.
Lydia? He said quietly. Yeah. Marry me. She went very still. What?
Marry me. Make this legal. Not just the land, but us. He turned to face her. I know it's fast. I know we've barely been together a few months, but I also know I don't want to do any of this without you. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. But I wanted you to know I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, and I want everyone to know it. Lydia stared at him for a long moment. Then she started laughing, not bitter or mocking, but genuine and surprised. What? He asked. You asked me to marry you the same day we killed 3 men, and you got a letter from your wife. Ex-wife. Still, she shook her head. Your timing is terrible. Is that a no? It's a yes, you idiot. She kissed him hard. It's been a yes since you refused to leave that first day. I just didn't know it yet. Relief and joy crashed through him in equal measure. Really? Really? Now stop asking stupid questions and kiss me properly. He did. And somewhere in California, Sarah Shaw read the letter that would arrive in 3 weeks, telling her that Caleb Mercer had found his peace, that he wouldn't be coming, that he wished her and Thomas well. She would cry when she read it, not from sadness, but from relief and a strange kind of gratitude. Then she would fold the letter carefully and put it in a box with other pieces of her past, and she would go back to the life she'd built. Both of them, choosing futures over ghosts. Both of them, finally free. They married 3 weeks later in the county clerk's office, the same cramped room where they'd filed their joint land claim. No ceremony, no celebration, just signatures on paper and a bored clerk who pronounced them husband and wife without looking up from his ledger. That's it? Lydia asked as they stepped back into the cold March air. That's it, Caleb confirmed. She looked down at her hand at the thin silver band Caleb had bought with their last spare cash. Feels like it should be bigger somehow. Want me to make a speech? Absolutely not. They rode back to the homestead in comfortable silence. The town had been subdued when they'd arrived, people crossing the street to avoid them, but no longer openly hostile. Word had spread about what happened with Pike, how 6 armed men had tried to take the Mercer land and only 3 had returned alive. Fear was better than friendship, Caleb had decided. At least fear kept people at a distance. But something had shifted in the weeks since the fight. A farmer named Hutchins had stopped by with a sack of seed corn, claiming he'd ordered too much. Mrs. Chen from the laundry had mended their torn clothes for free, saying only that she respected people who stood their ground. Small gestures, carefully neutral, but gestures nonetheless. They're testing us, Lydia had said after Hutchins left. Seeing if we're worth aligning with, or if we're just crazy enough to survive one fight. Which do you think we are? Both, probably. Spring came slowly that year, the ground reluctant to thaw. Caleb and Lydia worked the land with renewed purpose, planting the garden twice as large as before. They fixed the damaged fences, patched the bullet holes in the cabin, and built a new chicken coop to replace the one that had burned down during the fight. The work was hard but no longer desperate. They had enough supplies to last until harvest. They had each other. They had a future that felt possible instead of constantly threatened. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lydia said, "We should expand." Expand how? Cattle. Real cattle, not just the milk cow. We got the land for it, and the railroad's coming through 2 valleys over. They'll need beef to feed the workers. Caleb considered. Cattle means investment. Money, we don't have. So we find investors, or we take out a loan against the land. You want to risk the land? I want to build something bigger than survival. She turned to face him. We spent all winter just trying not to die. I'm tired of that. I want to actually live. He understood the feeling. The constant scramble for survival wore you down, made everything feel temporary and fragile. Building something meant believing in a future that wouldn't be taken away. "All right," he said. "Let's talk to the bank." The banker was a thin man named Westbrook who looked at them over wire-rimmed spectacles with barely concealed skepticism. "You want to borrow $200, he said slowly, like he was explaining something to children. "To buy cattle. With no experience in ranching and a homestead that's been attacked twice in the past 6 months." "That's right," Caleb said. "And what collateral are you offering?" "The land. 160 acres, filed legal. Both our names on the deed." Westbrook shuffled papers. "The land that you had to fight 6 armed men to keep? The land that the entire town knows is disputed?" "It's not disputed," Lydia said sharply. "It's ours, legal and paid for." "Mrs. Mercer, with all due respect, just Lydia is fine," Westbrook sighed. "Lydia, then. The bank's position is that your land represents a high-risk investment. The previous claim issues, the violence, the fact that you're—" He stopped himself. "The fact that we're what?" Caleb's voice went cold. "New to the area," Westbrook finished smoothly. "Untested in terms of creditworthiness." It was a polite way of saying they were outsiders who'd killed men to keep their land, and the bank didn't trust them not to do it again. Caleb stood. "Thank you for your time." "Wait." Westbrook held up a hand. "I didn't say no. I said it's high risk, but there might be another option." They sat back down. "The railroad's offering contracts for beef delivery," Westbrook continued. "Guaranteed purchase at fixed rates for anyone who can deliver on schedule. If you can secure one of those contracts, I can approve a loan based on future earnings." "How do we get a contract?" Lydia asked. "Talk to the railroad office in Austin. But I'll warn you, they're not giving contracts to just anyone. You'll need to prove you can deliver quality cattle in quantity." It wasn't ideal, but it was something. They left the bank with more questions than answers and rode to Austin the next day. The city had grown since Caleb had last seen it, new buildings rising like weeds after rain. The railroad office was a chaos of noise and activity, men shouting, papers flying, deals being made in rapid-fire exchanges that left Caleb's head spinning. The contracts manager was a young man with slicked-back hair and the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the face but probably needed to be. "You want a beef contract," he said, barely glancing at them. "How many head can you deliver?" 50 to start, Caleb said, inflating their actual capacity. "More as we expand." 50. The manager laughed. "We're talking to ranchers who can deliver 500, 1,000. 50 head isn't worth my time to write up the paperwork." "Then don't write it up," Lydia said. "We'll take our business elsewhere." "To who? We're the only railroad coming through this region for the next 5 years. The manager finally looked at them properly. "You're the ones who killed Pike's men, aren't you?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "We defended our land." Right, heard about that." The manager leaned back in his chair. "Tell you what, you get me 100 head of quality beef delivered to the railhead by September, I'll give you a contract. But you miss that deadline or deliver poor quality, you're blacklisted. No second chances." 100 head by September, Caleb repeated. "That's 5 months." "That's the offer. Take it or leave it." They took it. On the ride home, Lydia said, "We just agreed to deliver cattle we don't own by a deadline we can't meet." "I know." "So what's the plan?" Caleb thought about it. "We buy 20 head with the bank loan. We breed them fast, hope for twins, pray nobody gets sick, and we recruit help." "Help from where? The town barely tolerates us." "Not the town. Other homesteaders. People in the same situation we're in, desperate, overlooked, willing to work for a cut of the profits instead of wages." It was a gamble. But everything they'd done since Caleb came back had been a gamble. They started recruiting the next week, riding to isolated homesteads and making their pitch. Most people turned them down outright. A few listened but declined. But 3 families agreed. The Hutchins with their seed corn, a widow named Mrs. Reeves who had land but no cattle, and a young couple named the Garcias who'd just arrived from Mexico with nothing but ambition. Together they pooled resources. The bank loan bought 20 head of mixed cattle. Mrs. Reeves contributed her pasture land for grazing. The Garcias had experience with cattle from their time working ranches further south. Hutchins knew the local market and could negotiate better prices for supplies. It was messy and complicated and held together by handshake agreements and mutual desperation. But it was something. The summer was brutal. They worked dawn to dark, moving cattle between pastures, treating sicknesses, repairing fences that the cattle seemed determined to destroy. 2 calves died in June from a disease Caleb didn't recognize. 1 cow broke her leg and had to be put down. The heat was relentless, drying up water sources and forcing them to dig new wells. Caleb lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Lydia developed a persistent cough that worried him more than he admitted. The Garcias' marriage nearly fell apart under the strain. Mrs. Reeves threatened to pull out twice, but they pushed forward because the alternative was failure, and failure meant losing everything they'd built. In August, 3 weeks before the delivery deadline, they had 97 head of cattle. Not the 100 they'd promised, but close enough that Caleb thought they might be able to negotiate. Then the railroad changed the delivery location. What do you mean it changed? Caleb stared at the telegram in disbelief. The delivery point had moved from 2 valleys over to a railhead 15 miles north. 15 miles of rough terrain with a herd of cattle that barely tolerated being moved across flat ground. This is deliberate, Lydia said. They're trying to make us fail. Why would they do that? Because we're nobodies who demanded a contract. Because they want to teach us a lesson about knowing our place. She crumpled the telegram. Doesn't matter. We move the cattle or we lose the contract. They moved the cattle. It took 4 days of driving them through brush and ravines, across a river that was deeper than expected, around settlements that didn't want a herd anywhere near their property. They lost 2 head to predators and 1 to sheer stubbornness. The animal simply sat down and refused to move until it died of what Caleb could only assume was spite. But on September 4th, they delivered 94 head of cattle to the railhead. The inspector walked through the herd slowly, checking teeth, examining hides, testing temperaments. Caleb's heart hammered with each critical look. Finally, the inspector nodded. Quality's acceptable. Counts short, though. We lost some on the drive, Caleb said. Can we make it up on the next delivery? Next delivery's contingent on this 1 meeting specifications. The inspector consulted his clipboard. Contract says 100 head. You delivered 94. We delivered what we could in the time we had, Lydia said, and every head is quality. Better than quality. That may be, but the contract is between you and people who've done the impossible, Caleb interrupted. We started with nothing. We built a partnership from scratch. We moved cattle through terrain that would have killed a larger operation. And we delivered on time with product you just admitted meets specifications. So yes, we're 6 head short, but we're here, and we're reliable, and next time we'll deliver 106 to make up for it. The inspector looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. You got nerve, I'll give you that. He signed the paperwork. Contract approved. But you better deliver those extra 6 next time or we're done. You'll get them, Caleb promised. The payment came through a week later. After splitting it with their partners and paying back the bank loan, Caleb and Lydia had enough left over to buy winter supplies, invest in breeding stock, and still have a small cushion for emergencies.
It wasn't wealth, but it was stability. That night they sat on their porch, exhausted and satisfied, watching the first stars appear. We did it, Lydia said quietly. We did. You know what this means? We get to do it all over again next year? She laughed. Yes, but also we proved it's possible to build something out here, to make it work. Caleb took her hand. You were right about expanding, about risking everything to build instead of just survive. I'm usually right. Don't let it go to your head. She leaned against him. Too late. The partnership grew over the next 2 years. More homesteaders joined, drawn by the success of the first cattle drive. They formalized the arrangement, the Mercer Ranch, it was called, though it was really a collective of 8 families working together. Caleb handled the logistics and negotiations. Lydia managed the day-to-day operations. The Garcias trained new hands. Mrs. Reeves kept the books with a precision that intimidated everyone. Hutchins dealt with supplies and equipment. It wasn't perfect. They argued about priorities, about money distribution, about who deserved credit for various successes. But they worked through it because the alternative was going back to struggling alone. The town's attitude shifted too. When the Mercer Ranch delivered 300 head of cattle on their third contract, people started treating them with something approaching respect. The general store lowered their prices back to normal. The feedlot welcomed their business. The bank actively courted them for expansion loans. It was strange being accepted after so long as outsiders. Caleb didn't entirely trust it. People only respect power, he said one evening. We're useful now, so they're nice. If we fail, they'll turn on us again. Probably, Lydia agreed. But I'll take conditional respect over constant hostility. In the spring of their third year together, Lydia told Caleb she was pregnant. He'd been checking fence line when she found him, her face unreadable. We need to talk, she said. His stomach dropped. Those words never led anywhere good. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm pregnant. He stared at her. You're… what? Pregnant. With child. Going to have a baby in about 7 months. The world tilted sideways. A baby. Their baby. A child who would grow up on this land, in this life they'd built from nothing. Caleb? Lydia's voice was uncertain now. Say something. He dropped the hammer he'd been holding and pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Is this real? Very real, and very inconvenient timing. There's never convenient timing for something like this. True. She pulled back to look at him. You all right? You look pale. I'm terrified, he admitted. What if I'm a terrible father? What if something happens to you? What if we're fine? She put his hand on her still flat stomach. What if this is exactly what we need? He wanted to believe her, but the memory of Thomas, his son who didn't remember him, who had another father now, made his chest tight. I won't be absent this time, he said fiercely. I'll be here, for all of it. I know you will. She kissed him softly. Now help me figure out how to run a cattle ranch while growing a human. The pregnancy was difficult. Lydia suffered from nausea that lasted into her 5th month. Her back ached constantly from the physical work she insisted on continuing. Caleb tried to make her rest, but she was stubborn about maintaining her role in the operation. I'm pregnant, not dying, she snapped when he suggested she stop riding out to check the herds. You're carrying our child. That's more important than cattle. The cattle pay for food and shelter for that child, so they're equally important. They compromised. Lydia continued working but delegated the most dangerous tasks. Caleb hovered nervously and tried not to be too obvious about it. In November, a letter arrived from California. Caleb recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately, and his hands went cold. You want me to open it? Lydia asked, watching his face. No, I need to. The letter was brief. Caleb, I heard through mutual acquaintances that you're married now and expecting a child. Congratulations. I mean that sincerely. Thomas is 10 now. He's doing well in school and talks about becoming a teacher. Daniel is a good father to him, but recently Thomas has started asking questions about you, about the war, about why you left, about who you were. I've told him the truth as best I can, that you fought in a war that took you away, that I thought you were dead, that by the time we learned otherwise, I'd already built a new life. He wants to write to you. I'm not asking you to be his father again. Daniel is his father. But if you're willing, I think it would help Thomas to have some connection to where he came from. Only if you want to. No pressure, but I thought I should offer. Sarah Caleb read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Lydia. She read it in silence, then set it down carefully. What do you want to do? I don't know. He stood and paced the cabin. Part of me wants to write back immediately, tell him everything, build some kind of relationship. And the other part is terrified that opening that door will make me want more, that I'll start resenting the life he has without me, that it'll poison what I've built here. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think you should write back. Why? Because that boy deserves to know his father didn't abandon him. Because you deserve to have some relationship with your son, even if it's just letters. Because holding on to pain and regret will eat you alive. She took his hand. You chose to let go of trying to reclaim your old life. That was brave and right. But this isn't reclaiming. This is building something new with the pieces that are left. She was right. She usually was. He wrote back to Sarah, carefully and honestly. He explained why he'd chosen not to come to California, why he thought it was better for Thomas to have the stable life Daniel provided. But he also said he'd be honored to correspond with Thomas, to answer questions, to be whatever kind of father a 10-year-old boy needed from 1,500 miles away. The first letter from Thomas arrived 3 weeks later. Dear Caleb, my ma says you're my real father, but that Daniel is my father too. That's confusing, but I think I understand. She says you fought in the war and that's why you were gone. Did you kill anyone in the war? What was it like? Do you have scars? I'm good at arithmetic and reading. My teacher says I might go to a real school in San Francisco next year. Do you have any kids with your new wife? What's her name? What do you do in Texas? Thomas. The questions were blunt and curious and completely without guile. Caleb found himself smiling as he read. He wrote back that night telling Thomas about the ranch, about Lydia, about the baby that was coming. He answered the war questions as honestly as he could without giving nightmares to a 10-year-old. He asked about Thomas's life, his interests, his dreams. It wasn't the same as being a father in the way he'd once imagined, but it was something real and good. Their daughter was born on a cold December night while a storm raged outside. The midwife, Mrs. Chen, who'd expanded from laundry to delivering babies, worked efficiently while Caleb paced and tried not to panic. When he finally heard the baby's cry, sharp and angry and alive, something in his chest cracked open. It's a girl, Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the tiny screaming thing in a blanket. Healthy lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for. Caleb approached the bed cautiously. Lydia looked exhausted and triumphant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. We have a daughter, she said, smiling. We have a daughter, he repeated, still trying to process it. Mrs. Chen placed the baby in his arms. She was impossibly small, impossibly fragile, with Lydia's dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through him. What should we name her? Lydia asked. They discussed names for months without settling on anything, but looking at his daughter's face, Caleb knew immediately. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. That's perfect. Hope grew fast, changing every day. Caleb found himself utterly unprepared for how much love he could feel for someone so small. He'd loved Thomas too, but that had been different, complicated by war and distance and loss. This was pure and immediate and terrifying in its intensity. Letters from Thomas continued, arriving every few months. The boy wrote about school, about his friends, about the city he lived in. Caleb wrote back about the ranch, about hope, about the land that was slowly transforming from survival to legacy. They were building a relationship that wasn't father and son in the traditional sense, but wasn't nothing either. It was what Lydia had predicted, something new from the pieces that remained. The ranch continued to expand. By Hope's second birthday, they were delivering 500 head of cattle per contract and had acquired an additional 80 acres. The partnership had grown to 15 families, and they'd started talking about incorporating as an actual business. One afternoon, a stranger rode up to the homestead. He was well-dressed, riding an expensive horse, and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting what they wanted. Caleb Mercer? He asked. That's me? The man dismounted and extended a hand. James Sullivan. I represent a consortium of investors interested in the beef industry. I've heard impressive things about your operation. Caleb shook his hand warily. What kind of things? That you've built a successful collective ranch from nothing, that you've delivered consistently on railroad contracts, that you've turned this valley from wasteland into productive cattle country. Sullivan looked around appraisingly. We'd like to invest in your expansion. We're not selling. I'm not asking you to sell. I'm offering capital investment in exchange for partial ownership. You maintain operational control. We provide funding for significant expansion. It was the kind of offer that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. Now it felt almost expected. I'll need to discuss it with my partners, Caleb said. Of course. Here's my card. Think it over. After Sullivan left, Lydia emerged from the cabin with Hope on her hip. Investment offer, she asked. How'd you know? Because we're successful now. Successful people attract money people. She shifted Hope to her other hip. What do you think? I think we've come a long way from fighting over who owned an abandoned cabin. That's not an answer. I think we should hear them out. If the terms are fair, it could mean real security, not just for us, but for everyone in the partnership. They called a meeting of all the partner families. The discussion was heated.
Some wanted to accept any investment that would guarantee stability, others worried about losing control to outsiders. But eventually they reached consensus on terms they'd accept. Sullivan's consortium met their terms. The Mercer Ranch officially incorporated with sufficient capital to triple their cattle operation, build proper facilities, and establish themselves as a major supplier in the region. Success, it turned out, was strange. Caleb had spent so long fighting just to survive that having actual security felt unreal. But it was real. They had money in the bank, a growing operation, respect from the community, and a future that looked bright instead of threatened. One evening, 5 years after Caleb had first returned to find a stranger in his cabin, he and Lydia sat on their porch watching Hope play in the yard. She was chasing chickens with the fierce determination of a 5-year-old who'd been told repeatedly not to do exactly that. "You think we made it?" Lydia asked. "Made what?" "It. The thing we were trying to build. The legacy." Caleb considered. "I think we're still building it, but yeah, I think we made it." Hope caught a chicken and promptly fell over, laughing as it escaped. Lydia shook her head fondly. "She's got your stubbornness," Caleb observed, "and your terrible timing. Did you see her try to climb the fence yesterday?" "I did. Reminded me of someone else I know." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter terrorize livestock. In the distance, cattle grazed on land that had almost been lost a dozen times. The cabin they'd fought over had been expanded twice and now barely resembled the rough structure Caleb had built years ago. "Got another letter from Thomas," Caleb said. "He's graduating next month, top of his class." "You going to go?" "To California?" "No, that's his life, not mine. But I sent him a gift and told him I'm proud of him. Think you'll ever meet him?" "Maybe. When he's ready. When it wouldn't disrupt anything." Caleb pulled Lydia closer. "But I'm not chasing it anymore. What I have here is enough." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that first day. You standing on the porch, looking half dead, refusing to leave. You pointing a rifle at my chest. That too." She smiled. "I should have shot you. Probably would have saved us both a lot of trouble. Would have been lonelier, though." "Yeah," he agreed. "Would have been lonely." Hope ran up to the porch, breathless and filthy. "Papa, Mama, watch me catch that big one." "Hope, we've talked about this," Lydia said. "Leave the chickens alone." "But I'm practicing." "Practicing what?" "Being a rancher like you." Caleb laughed and scooped her up, dirt and all. "Ranchers don't chase chickens, little one. They work with cattle." "Then teach me to work with cattle." "When you're bigger." "I'm big now." "Bigger than now." She pouted but accepted it, wiggling down and running off to find new trouble. "She's going to be a handful," Lydia observed, "like her mother. And her father. Don't pretend you're not difficult." "I prefer determined." "Same thing." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The land stretched out before them, transformed by years of work and blood and stubborn refusal to quit. Caleb thought about the man who'd walked 400 miles to come home to nothing, about how broken he'd been, how lost, about how close he'd come to giving up more times than he could count. That man would barely recognize this life, this peace. "You ever regret it?" Lydia asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going after them? Sarah and Thomas?" He thought about it honestly. "Sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what it would have been like if I'd made different choices." "And?" "And then I wake up next to you and watch Hope chase chickens and work with people who trust me. And I think I made the right choice. Not the easy one, not the one without pain, but the right one." "Good answer. I've had practice." They sat until the stars came out, until Hope got tired and demanded to be carried to bed, until the day's work was done and tomorrow's work was waiting. Inside the cabin, Caleb tucked Hope into bed and listened to her prayers, a habit Lydia had taught her despite Caleb's skepticism about such things. "And please bless Papa and Mama and all the cows and the chickens, even though they don't like me and Brother Thomas in California, even though I've never met him, and make me grow big and strong so I can be a rancher," Hope finished in a rush. "Amen," Lydia said from the doorway. "Amen," Hope repeated, already half asleep. Caleb kissed her forehead and joined Lydia in their room. They lay down together in the bed that had once had careful space between them and now had none. "You think she'll take over the ranch someday?" Lydia asked.
If she wants to. If not, we'll find someone who does. Very progressive of you. I learned from the best. Flattery won't get you anywhere. It's getting me somewhere right now. She laughed and kissed him, and for a while they forgot about ranches and cattle and everything except each other. Later, in the darkness, Caleb thought about legacy. Not the kind built on property or money or success, though those things mattered, but the kind built on choices, to stay instead of run, to build instead of destroy, to choose hope over despair even when despair seemed easier. He'd come back to nothing and built everything, not alone, but with a woman who'd also lost everything and refused to accept that as an ending. Together they'd created something that would outlast them both. A ranch that employed dozens of families. A daughter who would carry forward their stubbornness and strength. A relationship with a son 1,500 miles away that proved love didn't have to look traditional to be real. They transformed 160 acres of disputed land into a legacy. And the best part was it hadn't required perfection, just persistence. Just two broken people who refused to stay broken. Outside, the wind moved through the valley that was theirs. The cattle settled in for the night. The chickens roosted safely away from Hope's enthusiastic attention. The land that had been fought over and died for and bled into lay quiet under the stars. And in the cabin that had witnessed the beginning of everything, Caleb Mercer held his wife close and slept the sleep of a man who'd finally found his way home. Not back to what was. Forward to what could be. That, he thought as sleep claimed him, was the only legacy that mattered.